What if I told you that in 1847, a husband and wife survived an entire Pennsylvania winter, temperatures dropping to 20 below zero, with nothing but a hand axe, a canvas sack, and whatever the forest gave them. No furnace, no insulation company, no electric bill. And here's the part that should stop you cold. They slept warmer than you do tonight, in a house you're paying $400 a month to heat. Let that sink in for a second. They knew 20 tricks. 20 techniques that worked so well, so cheaply, and so completely outside the grip of any industry that most of them were quietly, deliberately buried. Removed from government publications, discouraged in extension bulletins, written out of building codes, and the families who still use them, they live in rural Ohio and Pennsylvania, wear straw hats, and haven't paid a utility bill in living memory. Tonight, I'm going to walk you through every single one of those 20 tricks. Some of them you can start using this weekend. Some of them will make you genuinely angry when you realize what was taken from you, and why. And the last one, the 20th, is so simple and so cheap that 1 gallon of buttermilk does what a $400 can of commercial sealant cannot. Stay with me because I promise you, by the time we reach that 20th trick, you will never look at your heating bill, your food storage, or your basement walls the same way again. I want you to understand where this information comes from before we go any further. Because this isn't somebody's blog post or a list someone assembled from a weekend of internet searching. I spent the better part of 3 years driving through Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and Holmes County, Ohio, two of the last places in America where these techniques never died, sitting at kitchen tables, asking questions, watching hands work, and taking notes. I sat with an 81-year-old man named Aaron near Millersburg, Ohio, and he poured me coffee from a pot that had been simmering on a wood stove since 4 in the morning. When I asked about his electric bill, he laughed. He didn't have one. I found a 1985 Homestead journal in the Pennsylvania State Archives in Harrisburg that one government agency apparently hoped nobody would ever read again. I found USDA bulletins from 1923 that were quietly pulled from public circulation in the late 1970s. I found the names, I found the dates, I found the receipts. What I'm about to share with you is real, it is documented, and it works. In the house you already own this winter. Let's start with the first trick, and it's called banking the cabin. Picture this. You're walking up to one of these old Pennsylvania log cabins, the kind built between 1750 and 1820. You notice something strange. The base of the cabin, maybe 3 feet up from the ground, is buried in a thick berm of dirt, leaves, dry pine needles, and packed earth. The untrained eye sees neglect, maybe overgrowth, maybe laziness. That's not what it is. That's engineering. The pioneers, and they learned this from the Lenape and the early Pennsylvania Dutch settlers who brought it over from Germany, understood something that the modern insulation industry has spent a century trying to make you forget. Loose organic matter packed against a lower wall creates a dead air barrier, and that dead air barrier outperforms modern fiberglass insulation by a measurable margin. University of Vermont extension studies later confirmed that a 24-inch berm of dry leaves and soil reduces heat loss through a lower wall by close to 40%. 40%. From leaves, from dirt, from what the yard gives you every October for free. They banked the cabin in fall. They unbanked it in spring, the cabin breathed, and it held heat for 16 hours after the fire went out. Here's the part that should make your blood pressure rise. Try doing this on your own property today in most suburban or exurban developments. A code enforcement officer will be on your doorstep inside a week, citing you for vegetative debris against a structure. The official justification is fire risk. The real reason becomes very clear when you consider that the insulation industry in this country is worth over $11 billion a year. That industry does not benefit when a homeowner solves a $3,000 problem with a rake and a wheelbarrow. The Amish families I visited in Holmes County still bank their root cellars and outbuildings every single fall. They lose nothing to the cold. They pay nothing to anyone. Food in those cellars holds at 38 degrees from November through March without burning a single watt. But banking the cabin is only half of the first layer of defense, because none of it works if the heat you're generating escapes straight up the chimney. And that's where the second trick comes in. Every original log cabin built between 1750 and 1860 had what the builders called a smoke shelf, a deliberate ledge cut into the chimney about 4 feet above the firebox. Here's what happens at that ledge. Cold air that would normally plunge down the chimney flue and into the room, what we now call a backdraft, hits that ledge and bounces. It redirects back into the room as warm air. At the same time, that shelf catches creosote buildup before it can migrate up into the upper flue where it becomes a fire hazard. Modern chimney codes prohibit smoke shelves in new construction. The reason given is that they complicate inspection. The real reason is that a smoke shelf dramatically reduces how much fuel a fire needs to heat a space, which is money out of someone's pocket. National Park Service maintenance records from the restoration of the 1798 Hans Hare House in Willow Street, Pennsylvania, document that the original smoke shelf in that building prevented chimney fires for 172 years before the structure was ever modernized. 172 years. The pioneers were not lucky. They were precise. The third trick almost got me hurt when I tried it the first time, and I want you to listen carefully because the margin between doing this right and doing it dangerously is not wide. The pioneers heated their beds, not their rooms, using what they called a bed warmer stone, not the decorative metal pans you see in museum gift shops, a specific kind of stone, river-tumbled granite, dense sandstone. The pioneers knew, and this knowledge was passed down through every generation, that you never, ever use shale, never limestone, and absolutely never any stone pulled from a creek bed or riverbank. The reason is trapped moisture. Stones that have been submerged or are naturally porous hold water inside, and when you put them in a fire, that water superheats and the stone explodes. People have been injured. People have died. The right stone, dense, dry, tumbled smooth, goes into the fire pit for 40 minutes. You wrap it in 3 layers of wool. You slide it under the foot of the bed. Imagine waking up at 2 in the morning, outside temperature at 10 degrees, and the foot of your bed is still radiating warmth. One stone the size of a bread loaf holds heat for up to 9 hours. The Amish women I met in Lancaster County still use this for young children during the coldest weeks of January. The cost is exactly zero. The stone lasts a lifetime, and no electric blanket ever sold can claim to be safer, because there's nothing in a stone to short out, nothing to catch fire, nothing to malfunction. The shift in thinking here is the thing that matters. The pioneers did not heat a room and hope the bed benefited. They heated the bed. That one conceptual change is worth more than every smart thermostat ever manufactured. Pennsylvania Utility Commission filings from 2019 show that the average homeowner in that state pays $412 a year just to heat bedrooms that no one is sleeping in during daylight hours. The pioneers paid nothing, and they slept warmer. But warmth at night is only one piece of the winter survival puzzle. The pioneers also had to keep food cold, without electricity, without a refrigerator, without any of the mechanical infrastructure we've been trained to consider essential. And the fourth trick is where they solve that problem more elegantly than any modern appliance ever has. They called it the spring box. Picture a small wooden enclosure built directly over a natural spring or a flowing creek with water moving through it constantly. That water, sourced from deep underground, holds a temperature between 42 and 46 degrees Fahrenheit year-round across most of the eastern United States. That is actually colder than the FDA's official recommendation for refrigerator storage. The spring box never loses power. It never breaks down. It requires no energy input whatsoever. The Amish families I visited in Holmes County keep their milk in spring boxes, and that milk stays fresh for 11 days without a single kilowatt hour of electricity. Compare that to your $2,000 stainless steel refrigerator the next time an ice storm takes the grid down for a week. Here's where the pattern of suppression becomes impossible to ignore. Most modern county health codes prohibit the sale of any food product cooled exclusively by a spring box, even though those prohibitions have no documented scientific basis. The Amish communities I visited don't sell their spring-cooled milk to outsiders, so they stay beneath the radar. They drink it themselves. And in over 250 years of continuous use, the communities I visited have no recorded cases of waterborne illness traceable to the practice. The fifth trick connects directly to food storage, and it may be the most aggressively suppressed technique on this entire list. The pioneers preserved meat without refrigeration, without canning, without the commercial salt cure industry, through a method called potted meat in lard. You cook the meat thoroughly, you pack it tight into a stoneware crock, and then you pour rendered hog lard over the top, at least a full inch of solid fat, completely sealing the surface. That lard creates an anaerobic environment. Bacteria cannot grow without oxygen. A 1923 USDA bulletin, which was quietly removed from public circulation sometime in the late 1970s, documented that potted meat stored this way in a cool root cellar remained safe to eat for up to 14 months. 14 months. No electricity, no freezer, no mason jars, no processing plant, no supply chain. I watched a woman in her 70s in Berlin, Ohio, pack 22 pounds of pork shoulder into 3 crocks in under an hour. She told me her family had been eating from crocks like those since before the Civil War. The technique works. The moment you try to sell potted meat to a neighbor without a commercial license, however, you become a criminal under modern food safety law. Draw your own conclusions about why. Now, if you're watching this, thinking these first tricks only apply to people building from scratch on raw land, stay with me. Because starting with the 6th trick, everything I'm about to describe can be applied to the house you already own. The thermal mass wall. The pioneers built this into the north side of every cabin from Maine to the Carolinas. And the principle is so simple, it's almost offensive once you understand it. Dense material, stone, brick, packed earth, absorbs heat during the day and releases it slowly through the night. Here's what this looks like in practice. You identify a south or southwest facing wall inside your home. You stack solid concrete pavers or salvaged brick against the interior of that wall. You let winter sunlight come through a south-facing window and hit that mass for 6 hours. Come sundown, that mass radiates warmth for 9 to 12 hours. A 1981 study from what is now the National Renewable Energy Laboratory measured a 28% reduction in supplemental heating costs in homes that added just 400 pounds of thermal mass. 400 pounds is roughly 120 standard concrete pavers from any home improvement store. Total cost, between $140 and $200 depending on your region. The pavers stack on a piece of plywood, zero structural modification required. In 7 winters of monitoring my own retrofit, using salvaged brick from a torn-down barn near New Holland, Pennsylvania, I reduced propane consumption by 31%. The 7th trick for existing homes is what the pioneers called the winter window. Every window on the north side of the cabin got covered with a heavy quilted curtain backed with wool. And here's the critical detail that modern window treatments always get wrong. A strip of leather trimmed along the bottom edge, pressed against the sill to seal it. That leather strip blocked the convection current that pulls cold air down a glass surface and drives it across the floor at ankle level. Modern curtains and cellular shades fail because they leave a gap at the bottom. The pioneers didn't. Awaited hem at the bottom, leather in their day, a sandbag wrapped in canvas today, closes that gap entirely. University of Minnesota. Extension testing in 2008 found that a properly sealed insulating window cover reduces heat loss through a single pane window by up to 73%. The 8th trick is the kitchen retreat. This one requires no materials at all, only a shift in how you use your house. Pioneers in hard winters closed off every room except the kitchen from December through February. The kitchen had the cook stove, the bread oven, the pump, and the light. They slept on pallets near the stove. They ate, washed, dried clothes, and entertained in that single, heated space. Heating one room instead of 8 cuts, fuel consumption by roughly 75%. The Amish families I know today still do a modified version of this, closing the upstairs in November and reopening it in March. Their houses are larger than yours. Their heating bills are smaller. The 9th trick solves the summer half of the food storage problem, and it's been hiding in plain sight for centuries. 2 unglazed terracotta pots, one nested inside the other with damp sand packed between them and a wet cloth over the top. This is called a zier pot in some traditions, and evaporative cooling is the mechanism. Imagine this. The water in the sand evaporates through the outer pot, pulling heat out of the inner chamber. Temperature inside drops 15 to 22 degrees below ambient. A man near Sugar Creek, Ohio, showed me his version of this, buried in the shaded north side of his garden. The carrots inside were crisp in August. He told me he hadn't opened a refrigerator in 9 years. The 10th trick is the one that changes everything you thought you knew about water safety. And this is where the channel's secret vault gets its name from, moments exactly like this one. Knowledge buried so deep that most people have no idea it exists. The pioneers didn't boil their water, they filtered it through a barrel of charcoal, sand, and gravel, layered in a specific sequence that the early German Mennonites brought over from the Rhineland in 1717. Charcoal on top, fine sand in the middle, coarse gravel at the bottom, with a layer of clean linen between each layer, and water poured in at the top emerges from a wooden spigot at the bottom clean enough to drink. EPA testing conducted in 1974, before the agency stopped publishing results that didn't serve a particular narrative, confirmed that a properly built slow sand filter removes between 98 and 99.9% of bacteria, including E. coli and Giardia. The entire apparatus costs less than $40 to build. It requires no power, it requires no chemical treatment, and it works. The 11th trick kept pioneer families nourished through winters when the pantry was lean and the cold was relentless, the bone broth pot that never went out. Picture a cast iron pot hanging at the back of the cook stove, simmering low and slow 24 hours a day, from October through April. Every bone, every scrap of meat, every vegetable peel, every bit of kitchen waste went into that pot. You ladled out a bowl when you were hungry and topped it back up with water and whatever the day offered. The constant low simmer prevented bacterial growth. The mineral content of the broth, calcium, phosphorus, collagen, trace minerals, replaced everything a dozen modern vitamin supplements claim to provide. A 1989 nutrition study from Cornell University documented that families who consumed daily bone broth showed measurably stronger bone density and significantly lower rates of joint disease than comparable families who did not. The 12th trick lit the dark for free. The lard lamp, 3 tablespoons of rendered animal fat, a twisted cotton wick, a shallow ceramic dish, burns for 4 hours, smokeless and odorless when the wick is properly trimmed. Total cost per hour of light, less than half a cent. The man who showed me his grandmother's lard lamp tin in Berlin, Ohio, pointed out that the wick inside was original, from 1934. The lamp still burned. The 13th was wood ash lye soap, made every spring by leaching water through a barrel of hardwood ashes and combining the resulting lye with rendered fat. One batch produced enough soap for a family of 8 for an entire year. 0 petroleum, 0 packaging, 0 supply chain. The 14th was the foot stove, a small perforated metal box filled with embers from the fireplace, carried into unheated meeting houses on Sunday mornings, and placed under the feet during 4-hour services. The Amish still use ceramic versions in their unheated winter buggies during funerals. The 15th was the corn shuck mattress, dried corn husks stuffed into a heavy ticking sack, replaced every spring. Warmer than feathers, cheaper than hay, and naturally resistant to bed bugs because the silica content in dry corn husks physically destroys insect exoskeletons on contact. The 16th was willow bark tea, brewed from the inner bark of the white willow tree and used by pioneer families for fevers, headaches, and joint pain. The active compound is salicin, which the body converts to salicylic acid. Bayer Pharmaceutical patented a synthetic version of this in 1899 and built an empire. The willow tree grew free along every creek in America, and it still does. The 17th was the cold smokehouse, smoking meat at 70 to 90 degrees for 7 to 14 days, low and slow. Hams and bacon preserved this way keep for a full year without any refrigeration. Modern commercial regulations require temperatures that destroy the traditional flavor profile and actually shorten shelf life. Nobody in the agency ever explained why that trade-off was necessary, because there is no good answer. The 18th was the north-facing root cellar, dug into a hillside, clay floor, single insulated door, a vent pipe at the ceiling to regulate humidity, holding produce at 36 to 40 degrees year-round without any mechanical system whatsoever. The 19th was the hand-dug shallow well, lined with stacked fieldstone, no concrete, no electric pump, just a wooden bucket on a rope. Testing of these wells has consistently shown cleaner results than most municipal water supplies because slow filtration through layers of soil and stone removes contaminants more thoroughly than chemical treatment ever could. And now we come to the 20th trick, the one I saved for the end because it is simultaneously the most suppressed, the most surprising, and the most immediately actionable thing I've found in 3 years of digging through Amish kitchens and Pennsylvania archives. I found it in a manuscript at the Pennsylvania State Archives in Harrisburg, in a collection of farm records donated by the descendants of a Lancaster County Mennonite family. The journal was written by a man named Christian Brubaker, dated October 11th, 1885. Brubaker describes a method his grandfather brought over from Switzerland, a technique used by every Amish family in Lancaster County until the early 20th century, when the United States Department of Agriculture began systematically discouraging it in extension bulletins after 1923. The reason the USDA gave was vague concerns about consistency. When you understand what the technique actually does, the real reason becomes obvious. It is called the buttermilk wall wash. Here's what this looks like. You take fresh buttermilk, the kind with active live cultures, not the pasteurized grocery store version stripped of its biology. You mix it with hydrated lime in a ratio of 3 parts buttermilk to 1 part lime. You brush this mixture onto interior walls, exterior wood siding, foundation stones, basement walls, any porous surface that is currently absorbing moisture, growing mold, or showing the kind of long-term deterioration that modern sealants promise to fix but never quite do. The lactic acid in the buttermilk reacts with the calcium in the lime to produce calcium lactate. The compound crystallizes into the microscopic pores of whatever surface you apply it to, forming a mineral barrier that resists moisture penetration, mold, mildew, and insect damage for between 8 and 15 years per application. Not per year, per application. Brubaker's journal records that his family washed the interior of their bank barn with this mixture every 7 years, beginning in 1841. When he wrote those entries in 1885, the original chestnut beams, 44 years in, were still structurally sound and moisture-free. 0 chemicals, 0 off-gassing, 0 ongoing cost. Let me give you the numbers that explain why this technique was removed from public manuals. A gallon of fresh buttermilk costs approximately $3. A 50-pound bag of hydrated lime costs about $12. One batch covers 400 square feet. Total cost per square foot, roughly 3.5 cents. The cheapest commercial mold-resistant paint currently on the market runs about 48 cents per square foot, and it doesn't last as long. The buttermilk wash outperforms it at 13 times lower cost. There's your vague concerns about consistency. There's your real reason. You can apply the buttermilk wall wash to your basement walls this weekend, to your foundation stones, to the underside of your porch, to the inside of your tool shed, to any wood surface that has been silently absorbing moisture for years. Application takes about an hour per 400 square feet. It dries in 12 hours. The faint sour smell disappears completely by the second morning. And over the following 30 days, it develops its full mineral hardness. A hardness that, according to Christian Brubaker's journal, his grandfather told him would allow a properly treated house to outlive 3 generations of the family that built it. The 1798 Hans Herr House in Willow Street, Pennsylvania, the same building I mentioned when we talked about the smoke shelf, was treated with this wash for over a century. It is still standing, still structurally sound. The original interior plaster has never been replaced. Here at Secret Vault, we don't cover these things because they're interesting trivia. We cover them because they represent a systematic pattern, knowledge that worked, that cost almost nothing, that gave ordinary families genuine independence from industries built around manufactured dependency. And that knowledge did not fade because it failed. It was pushed aside because it succeeded too completely for someone else's comfort. The insulation industry grew around a problem the pioneers had already solved with a rake. The paint and sealant industry grew around a problem a Swiss immigrant solved with a bucket. The pharmaceutical industry grew, in part, around a pain remedy that grew free on every creek bank in the country. You didn't lose this knowledge by accident. You lost it by design. But here's what that design overlooked. The knowledge didn't disappear. It survived in journals tucked into archive boxes in Harrisburg. It survived in the muscle memory of women in Berlin, Ohio, who still pack lard crocks every November. It survived in the habits of men who still bank their root cellars every fall, not because someone told them to, but because it works. The most radical act available to you right now is simply to remember what was taken and quietly begin using it again. Imagine this. It's January, it's 11 degrees outside, and you are warm, not because a company is pumping propane through a meter and charging you for the privilege, but because there's a stone at the foot of your bed that has been holding heat since before you went to sleep. Because the windows on the north side of your house have a weighted curtain pressed against the sill, because the south wall of your living room has been absorbing sunlight all day through a south-facing window and is now giving it back slowly into the dark. Because a berm of dry leaves against your foundation is doing the work of $3,000 worth of spray foam insulation for free. This is not a fantasy. This is how people lived. This is how people thrived. In conditions harder than yours, on resources smaller than yours, with knowledge that was, once upon a time, simply common sense. Start with 1. Bank your foundation with leaves before the first hard frost. Put a stack of concrete pavers against your south wall this weekend. Brew a batch of willow bark tea the next time your joints ache. Mix a bucket of buttermilk and lime and put it on the basement wall that's been weeping since you bought the house. Tell me, in the comments, which one you start with. I read every single comment, and I'm especially interested in hearing from those of you who have land with running water on it. Tell me what you have to work with, and I'll tell you exactly which of these 20 tricks I'd start with if it were my place. The pioneers didn't survive brutal winters because they were tougher than you. They survived because they knew things, specific, practical, tested, beautiful things, that took entire industries, decades of lobbying and bulletin pulling and code writing to erase from public memory. Tonight, you got 20 of those things back. Now go put them to work. The cold doesn't care about the bill. It just cares whether you're ready.